All right, we're very lucky to have with us a distinguished panel to take questions on the impacts of AI in society. And I'll take just a brief moment to introduce each of our panelists. Then I'll kick us off with a question, and then I will open up the questions to you all. So first of all, Daniel Moyer, assistant professor of computer science, and his research focuses on machine learning applied and deep learning applied to medical imaging. And you've very early, you received a Young Scientist Award in 2016. So you sort of started with a bang in the field, and I'm proud to share a department with you as a new professor of the practice in computer science. We also have Frank Tong. I had an opportunity to meet with Frank even at the beginning of my time here at Vanderbilt. Had a great conversation around the future of deep learning and AI, but man, we had no idea that it was going to be happening so quickly. He's Centennial Professor of Psychology and Professor of Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences, and he's developing and training and exploring deep convolutional neural nets as potential models for understanding neural bases of human visual processing. We have Ole Molvik, who's assistant professor of history and also of communication science and technology and of physics, because one is not enough. And he's also the founder of the Emergent Technology Lab at the Wondery. He's also the curator of the Garland Scientific Instruments Collection. He was also really, in my mind, a very early explorer of generative models and of creative uses of the generative models. And I think in particular your work with, Talk with Einstein, which was a really cool, very early use. And he's also one of the leaders of the AI Grand Challenge in Arts and Sciences. And then we have Michael Best, Chancellor's Professor of History, is Professor of Communication, of Science and Technology, Professor of European Studies. He's also the author of a book that came out in September of 2022, Planet in Peril, the 4 greatest challenges and how we can overcome them, with a Cambridge University Press. And if time permits, I absolutely have a question about the book. And I'll note September 2022, November 2022, ChatGPT is released.
Instantly rendering my book obsolete.
So let me kick us off with a question, and this is going to be a tough one, and I'm very sorry, but I'm going to ask you in a single sentence if possible, or briefly, what is one major impact you foresee from the introduction of these large language models, such as ChatGPT, GPT-4 Bard, and others? So what's one impact? And who would like to start?
Okay. So
oh, and feel free to speak right into the microphone. It is impossible to speak too loudly into the microphones. It is definitely possible to speak too softly.
certainly. So ChatGPT, aside from all of my students asking about it, where I teach the Intro to AI course, so it's on the top of everyone's mind. One aspect is it's a new calculator, right? We got really upset, or maybe our parents got very upset that we weren't learning arithmetic very well, and so they banned us from using calculators. And calculators extend our mathematical ability, and so does ChatGPT. It's not better than a calculator because, I mean, it's definitely fancier, but it's not, in my opinion, it's not a stronger agent or a stronger tool. But we will have to get used to it in our daily lives, and it will seem ridiculous to do arithmetic by hand now. If you're, I don't know, an accountant, you have a 10 key and whatnot. So it will seem ridiculous to do the same things that ChatGPT will enable us to do. But what it enables us to do may not be what's promised, right? So,
yeah. I have a somewhat differing view, and it's not specific to ChatGPT, but you could further adapt an AI to perform medical image diagnosis, as Daniel does research on, or to deal with simple things in the law. Complex problems would be more difficult. But I think AI raises the question, what is the future of work, and will AIs be competitors or collaborators for future jobs? I think it really transforms a lot of white collar jobs. There are a lot of companies that want to monetize it. I don't know if it will increase or decrease our ultimate costs, and I don't know how it affects the future of employment. For me as an undergrad, I'd be asking, what do I do or what do I learn so that I'm not easily replaceable? As a cognitive neuroscientist, there's no thought that a human mind is capable of that cannot be operationalized in a conceptual space that these computers do. I don't see any hard barriers. So the open question is, where's the space for human thought if AI can mimic it, not perfectly, but to a high degree, much higher than ever before?
To be fair, I do think a calculator was a job title at one point and is no longer. I'm not sure we disagree here. Yeah.
Hi, so the answer to this question changes like just about every week. I've been talking on ChatGPT type topics for a while now, and had you asked me this question a month ago, I would have had a different set of answers, and I'm sure it's going to be true next month or two as well. Right now, I'm really interested in the degrees with which the general public rethinks how these things are usable. I would say that for the vast majority of people, they are using ChatGPT the way that the companies that are making them publicly available intend them to be used: text generation, image generation. It will be really interesting to see how people go about reusing them in ways that they want to use. Is this going to be an interface that somebody is able to create a novel way of interaction? So I'm primarily thinking of the ability to do plugins with the large language models that's been released in the last couple of weeks. The question being whether or not most users will think of them as, I can now connect my Instacart to my Yelp to my Google, and so you're using products that you're kind of familiar with and linking them together, or instead will users be asking, make me an Instacart, make me a Yelp, make me a Google, and have the kind of bespoke programming be part of that? That's really different ways of envisioning where the human fits into these models. And to me, this is the part that I'm paying most attention to over the next 6 months.
Well, Frank sort of stole my idea, which was the impact on labor, on the economy, automation. It's the ChatGPT, GPT-4. These are not necessarily, they're a new step in that direction, but I think economists have been worrying about this wave of automation already. There's a book that came out, I'd say even a decade ago, Brynjolfsson and McAfee, two MIT economists, talking about the age of brilliant machines and rising automation. The one thing that I think some people don't understand about this is it's not necessarily a case of humans being totally replaced by machines. I think what's more likely to happen is something similar to what happened in agriculture, for example, where after the advent of the machines, one person could do the work previously done by 10 or 50 or 100. And so you're still going to have humans very much needed in the loop until the AIs, robotically embodied AIs, reach a level that we're nowhere near in current society. But coming very soon, there's the impact for the self-driving cars, which we're having some starting problems with that, but I'm assuming that those will be worked out and we'll have increasing numbers of self-driving cars. And then I was talking to somebody who was thinking of going into journalism, another person who was thinking of going into graphic design. I suspect that those will be shaken up pretty dramatically. And it just probably is going to be much greater productivity and efficiencies, which will reduce the number of humans needed. And so Brynjolfsson and McAfee, these two MIT economists, their ultimate conclusion is we're going to be pushed as a society, chronic mass unemployment. This time is different. In the past, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, new forms of employment emerged to satisfy the need for labor. This time around, they're saying we're going to have to get some kind of basic income. We're going to be compelled to go in that direction, whether we like it or not. And so Karl Marx is sort of sitting there having the last laugh in the background, I guess.
Thank you so much. like to open up the floor now for questions from the audience. And if you raise your hand, let me know that you have a question, and then we can get the microphone to you.
Thank you all so much. To follow up on the questions about job and the risk of job displacement, et cetera, when we are in the place where the AI is able to conduct tasks and come up with solutions where we're net neutral in cost and things are all provided for us, what is the value of work for humans? And how do we establish that? And work versus creativity versus the other things that we consider important. Why are we doing the things we're doing?
I think that's a great question. I don't have an easy answer. I think we're entering a space that we haven't been before. So there are no obvious rules going forward. I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, but if I think of some of the tasks that they do, an AI could be tailored to, say, deal with internal medicine. Like if you just described your symptoms, going in, they would come up with, the 3 likely things it could be. And if they need to do some blood work, they would do that. I mean, it's not tricky. And then the real MD could then deal with the rare cases where like there's some real ambiguity, can you double check my handiwork? So maybe that's a numbers thing like Michael was talking about. But I think another part of your question was the notion of self-esteem. If a machine is capable of doing everything I can do, in what sense am I, providing added value? In some ways, it's unfair. AIs may be better than us in certain ways, and MDs better in others. Like we talk about things like intuition or being able to think outside the box. Maybe not every physician can do that, but maybe the exceptional ones can. But the AIs are trained on much more data. So rather than seeing just 10 or 100 or 10,000 patients, they are sifting through and essentially have experienced every single patient that's been in the United States, let's say, if all those records are accessible. So they have a true probabilistic account of, given these symptoms, what are the top three likely diseases that could have caused it. And there's not much room for error there. It's hard to outperform that. So that's what I find myself thinking about.
I think, yeah, I agree that there's a different metric between what AIs consider easy or similarly easy, right? And what humans consider related, similarly easy, right? These tasks in medicine that Professor Tong is talking about, they're all, to humans, very similar tasks, right? That they're all related to this disease pathology, and you want to first do diagnosis and then produce prognosis and produce a treatment course and decide whether or not they'll have this drug or that drug, right? Those are vastly different AI tasks, right? Those are all separate domains that we've trained one human for. And, the ML people in the room are certainly thinking like, well, I would need this data set for one and this data set for another. And those are sort of disparate data sets. Now, the general models may be able to amortize across this to have some general knowledge here, but I think an important unifying thread is that decision-making in the larger context is still a very human task because we're making human value judgments, basically. And this is a job. It's not a onerous job in the sense of physical labor or mental labor even. It's not a large calculation job, but somebody both needs to be responsible and needs to take blame. So I guess this is really the same thing. But also somebody needs to simply just make the decision, and that calculus is still not encoded yet. That doesn't mean it won't be in GPT-7, but these judgments are made on a level that's still a few abstractions away, at least in my opinion.
You want to say?
I have a slightly orthogonal answer to this. So as Jesse mentioned, I wear a number of hats here on campus. I started in the history department, and I do a lot of work now in the Emerging Technology Innovation Center at the Wondry. Putting on my historian's hat, we've had lots of examples of new tool development that have certainly made impacts on how life runs, but have not necessarily always matched the level of anxiety kind of pre-rollout that one might have expected beforehand. We also have had major disruptions in terms of big changes, agriculture revolution, industrial revolution, and other ones. I would say it's still somewhat up in the air if we are in one of these moments of like great social upheaval versus kind of novel tools that we will kind of adapt to. And I don't want to predict kind of where we fit in those, but I do want to remind us that even those large revolutions, they take a lot of time. It's not the case that these things happen overnight. One day, the world is completely different for every single person across the globe. They might well be accelerating, but one of the advantages we have in this particular one is the ability to look back at how some of these have happened and hopefully make some preparations for this. And I think this is the discussion that is happening in lots of places, and I would like to see us kind of reinforce. And one of the best ways to advance that is to make sure that as many members of society are feeling connected to those technologies, right? That they know what the dangers are, they know what the opportunities are, so that as many people can kind of help start making informed decisions. That's not to say that everybody should become a AI engineer or should join the Data Science Institute. There's lots of places to think about these kinds of questions, but I think it's really imperative that people do, and that we kind of have that process. And it's going to be one that's not going to take a month or a semester, but it's likely to be years, if not decades. But starting now is, I think, an imperative way to think about the kind of question: what is the role of a human if things do dramatically change?
One of my favorite quotations from Arthur C. Clarke is, the goal of the future is 100% unemployment so we can play. So that's a fairly utopian vision of what it would mean to have these machines, being surrounded by brilliant machines doing all the drudgery work, and then we get to do all the creative stuff. And it presupposes an unprecedentedly wise social order that is able to take, like today we have the abundant resources, but the way they're distributed is appallingly unfair and unequal. So it presupposes an almost utopian level of wisdom in socializing the benefits that will flow from these alleged brilliant machines. One of the other factors that would come into play in that society that Arthur C. Clarke is envisioning, but is also coming into play very much nowadays for people who find themselves unemployed, displaced. We derive a lot of meaning from our work. And especially if we have a sense that our work is doing something good for the people around us and for our world. You come home and you're tired, but you feel like, well, I made the world, I was able to help that person in this way. And so one of the big challenges is going to be educating people to find that kind of meaning if their work is clearly, if all the necessary stuff is being taken care of, well, can they find meaning in sort of voluntarily doing creative things for other people, forms of service that we maybe haven't envisioned yet, and sort of helping each other in new ways. That's going to be another, well, it'll be a good challenge to have, I suppose, but it is going to be a big challenge.
So I actually had two questions related to this emerging technology. So in the past, we had like other emerging technologies coming up that changed the labor market. And so I was wondering, have people analyzed these kinds of transition and how this impacted the individuals in their self-worth? And then also from analyzing these kind of data set, can we make, like, extract features that would help us to make the transition for a new technology better?
I'll take a quick stab at that. The answer is definitely yes. This is one of the major areas of economic history and others to explore. The uncertainty, I think, abounds whether or not what AI is able to do is truly analogous to the things that have happened beforehand. So the big 30,000 foot picture of previous changes has been increased productivity, has reduced the number of laborers required to do a certain thing. It has made a big impact on those specific workers, but in general, it has increased productivity for society and in fact produced more labor. There's been more jobs. there's a lot less, I think, certainty that this type of automation is going to be one that produces more labor opportunities kind of after it's come all the way through. That's where I think the big picture anxiety comes up, is that this may feel different, but it may not. It may well go very similar to kind of how past versions have done. So for those who are immediately impacted, and think of when Dall-E 2 has come out, a lot of concern around what it does for graphic designers and stock photographers. Right, these are very quick, easy ways to make the kind of labor that they would have produced. And I think stock photography probably has taken a pretty big hit. But luckily, a stock photographer rarely is someone a specialist just in stock photography, although there are some. But what you've noticed is, I don't know how many of you tried to make really good images with Dall-E 2 or Midjourney. Like, you're pretty amazed the first couple times, and then you try to make something very specific and it's hard. And then you go online and you notice there's all these people who are making way, way better things than you. Most likely the very same graphic designers that were making better they learned that tool quicker. They had that sense of creativity and visualization. So there's an example that I would say is meant to be less worrisome, right? This is the same skills were transferred well as a new tool. It was adopted into that space. Remains quite unclear as the progression of the ability of something like a large language model to move from making email responses faster to being able to code apps entirely by themselves in relatively short order, if that is going to result in the same level of expertise that manages those, or replacing that level of expertise. And this is the question about reskilling. I think we've had discussed here already. We can handle as a society reskilling of some percentage. I do not know the number of society, but it's entirely possible that we're talking about reskilling a significant number greater than we've experienced in the past. I think that's where the anxiety comes around. I'm not sure to answer your question, but I think that's what is at the meat of this.
It's sort of a follow-up thought or comment for people who are less familiar with the AI. And I think Daniel also pointed out the decision-making issue. So the AI can produce a response or solution like or answer a question like ChatGPT, but it's not obvious that it can interrogate its own response and make an evaluation of, is that the right response or not? Then again, it's not clear that all humans are very good at that too. There's some people believe the Earth is flat, or don't believe in evolution, and despite lots of data. So it is complex. So the lack of that self-awareness, or to be able to introspect and evaluate the outputs that one makes, or to explain the reasons for a decision. AIs right now don't do that very well. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. I personally believe it's solvable. It's just maybe 5-10 years down the road to being able to do that better. Will ever be enough that we're satisfied so that we trust the AI over the human for a medical decision? That part, I don't know. I could envision there'd be a two-tier medical system. You can do the AI medicine, and then there's no liability. You can't sue the company if it gives you a bad decision, or you can go with the human, and then you can go sue that MD, and there are two different rates of pay. I mean, that's not a crazy idea of a medical system like that. And you sign up for the AI because it's 1/10 the cost. Who knows, right?
Weren't we the other day, Jesse, weren't we talking about a form of prompt engineering where you can actually put into your prompt and tell me the parts in which you think you're most likely to be wrong, ChatGPT?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so in the design patterns, it's called reflexive. That's right.
So there's already the beginnings of an emergent self-critical capacity that will probably get stronger.
Augmented by humans, that's correct. And also, if you introduce a new policy, judge your response based on this policy. So some capability there, but it's always human in the middle, right? So let me introduce you, and then let me ask you to do it again.
For those of you looking for the technical work, the keyword is calibration from the statistical literature, or estimated regret from more reinforcement learning perspective. But notably, these are all mediated by the estimator itself, so by the machine learning agent. So, it can be very confident and very wrong, and very confident in its calibration and still wrong about its own calibration.
One thing that I'll mention here, just to put out there, is models such as GPT-3 and certainly GPT-4 in the large sort of non-report that they had for GPT-4 showed that the models were much better calibrated prior to the reinforcement learning for human feedback.
Yeah.
So giving these models additional training, and so they respond in the way that we are used to and have guardrails and are helpful, actually detracts from its ability to be well calibrated on how certain it should be.
The claim from OpenAI is something that like the feedback loop of human in the loop reinforcement learning has improved the calibration of these learners. One problem or one caveat that machine learning people would have with this is that the data that they're calibrating on is exactly human generated. So this is, I mean, that's sort of expected. I don't know how you would have not human generated text data and expect it to be calibrated as either. We'll find some Martians and ask them, but yeah.
But we'll have ChatGPT generated training data in ChatGPT 4 without, they can't avoid it, right?
Right, but it's surely peaking a little bit, but maybe that's okay. Maybe, yeah. Anyway. Yeah, I think
We'll do, yeah, and we'll get you again, Gregor, in just a moment. No, go ahead, please.
Well, it's actually dovetails from what the current conversation has been. What amount of like concern and what are the specific concerns we should maybe have about propagating misinformation in the future? And in particular, not just as like all the text that's going into the model, but also it seems like you could use this training, this feedback to be like, okay, no, you just brought up something about vaccines that is not correct. You relearn that, but that's still going to be done by a human who's defining, and all right, this is misinformation that you should forget. This isn't. How do we ensure that the people in the along the lines who will be doing this training are, I guess, correctly labeling misinformation and aren't working for, like, I don't know, nefarious purposes?
this answer will displease you.
Mine too.
Data sets are a reflection of our own world. They aren't any better. They aren't any worse, usually, unless you add noise to your own data set. But they aren't any better. And this is true about misinformation and biases that are indeed rooted in fact because of historical events, right? There are biases in data that cause decision-making agents to make perhaps or to make biased decisions for causally the wrong reason, but evidentially the right one, because just as the data are structured, that's the way the world is today. It is an unequal world, and there are bad things happening, right? The same is true about misinformation. It is present in the data set because humans wrote it, and it's not saying it's your fault, it's also my fault, but it's our fault, right? Like, we did this. So I don't think there's an easy machine learning solution for this, because it is a real data point in some sense. Now, deciding what's true and false in a prospective sense, like using these tools to generate misinformation, there are perhaps more guardrails there and more things that we can do. And you know, it's an active area of research, but also, like, hopefully an active area of engineering that somebody's making these, and maybe some people here are working on that. But in the data sense, at least, there are encodings or beliefs about the world. Flat Earth is a more innocuous one. There are flat earther data points, and those are real text objects that we trained on. So yeah, it's a reflection of our data set.
I remember when Wikipedia first was born, I was super skeptical that anything like this collective group enterprise would yield reliable information. And what I discovered was that there were people, because anybody can become an editor of Wikipedia, and so I became an editor of Wikipedia, and so people were going in and maliciously or maybe just deludedly modifying web pages. What they discovered was it was a self-healing system, because there were 350 people on the planet who really cared about whatever that fungus was that just somebody put in wrong information, and they corrected it. And then maybe the initial person would go back in and change it back. And it became kind of an arms race in which, what surprisingly, I mean, I rely on Wikipedia now all the time, routinely, for a quick bit of information. So it became surprisingly self-correcting in ways that I would not have anticipated.
So, so one question I had is related to the fact that a lot of these technologies are driven by big companies, and it's not very transparent actually how they weight their model potentially, or how they use the data that they collect. So how do we, if there are concerns about that these models that are developed can be altered in such a way that they particularly have a commercial incentive rather than actually helping the greater good, and how can we deal with that?
I think my view about all technologies is like a tool or some sort of power can be used for things that we would classify as good or not. And also how we classify that might depend on the person's perspective. So I think it's really an open question. I do think that because this technology is advancing so quickly, you know, and there are AI ethics panels, but I don't feel like we know what laws we want to create. And I think these AI models will get more powerful, like just a few examples, like AlphaFold, like being able to predict the shapes of 3D structured proteins. That's insanely like a huge advance. There are AIs that can design better computer chips so that those can run faster. AIs will eventually be able to code alternate versions of AIs. I don't see why that's not doable, and it could explore the space of how do I make my model better. So I wonder if we are capable of deciding on bounds for how flexible or powerful an AI could be, and decide on constraints. I think that's actually a really important question. We're not there yet. ChatGPT is impressive, but doesn't scare me like the way HAL might be scary in 2000 and was it 2001? We're past 2001 now. But yeah, I think it's worth the future's coming faster than we think. And I didn't think that this computer science revolution would happen in my lifetime, because I studied the human visual system, and the fact that there are computer vision systems are performing at the level that they are, even though they still fail in many ways. I wouldn't trust driving a self-driving car at this stage, but I'm surprised. Yeah.
Okay, quick crack at that. Actually, it's probably the same answer for the previous question and this one, which is, I think, the expectation that we're going to set up a perfectly trustworthy system that is going to be free of intentional misuse or bias or manipulation for whatever economic or other ends is unrealistic. Will remain unrealistic and might only become even less realistic as we kind of move forward in this. And that is why being as broadly aware of what these tools are, can do, how are they being used, how are they being misused, is at least as important as the effort it takes to kind of build the various guardrails and trust in the system. We talk a lot about OpenAI here. One of the things that had I had a second sentence to answer the very first question about kind of what we think the impact in society is, I think right now we're at a really unique moment in artificial intelligence where the success of large language models, particularly of ChatGPT by this one particular company, OpenAI, which has either been one of the greatest beta testing or marketing campaigns that we've seen in recent years. Outside of experts in the field, if you want someone to imagine what they think AI is today, it's going to be ChatGPT for some time, even though there are lots and lots of other AI use cases and models and trains that have been going on. But outside of the specialist community, this is it, right? This is the one that people are thinking about. And what we associate with it is replacement of white collar work, of creativity. We think also with hallucinations. We associate it with kind of unreliability. Those are going to be the key terms that most people are associating with AI as an entire field, even for those models that have very little to do with that kind of generative content. So we are going to have to reconcile how this kind of very public experiment transfers into, say, economic models. You're talking about kind of large companies. Right now, OpenAI is using the venture model and subscription model, and overwhelmingly the venture model is the one that's supporting the actual trying to keep the lights on there. Subscriptions, I haven't paid attention, but it's $20 a month. They have 100 million users. I have to imagine it's less than 10% that are subscribed. So it's not a huge portion of their outcome. The internet has been based primarily around advertising for the last 20 years. Right now, we do not know of any advertising models for large language subscriptions, not advertising. That will probably change. And then I think the questions we have around trustworthiness of the model and kind of where the information goes is very similar to the questions we've been having around Google and kind of other companies, but we haven't yet really been asking them about these processes. And we need to be doing that yesterday, not next year.
We have time for one more question.
All right, this is a bit of an off-color topic, but what are your thoughts around the emerging concepts of people finding affinity and affection for some of these tools? I'm thinking about the talk we just had about personas and this kind of subculture that's emerging with people finding them, personifying them, and finding them as easy tools to discourse with.
So unfortunately, one of our collaborators recently passed, but she did a thesis on, she was a Misty Yang. Her thesis was on a AI researcher at CSAIL or at MIT CS and AI laboratory. I guess it was just AI laboratory at that time, who made conversational agents, and his students were spending extra mainframe hours. Tells you what age it was. And he was like, his account was draining and he was wondering why. And he realized it's because they were staying up late to talk to the machine. Not for experiments, for fun. Because they thought, in this case, it was a psychologist app program, that they could talk to it. This was in like 1970. This was through ticker tape, right? On a PDB-10 or something. I don't know, actually. You should look up the thesis. Sadly, she can't, she's not here anymore, but this is an age-old story. I don't know if it's a problem, to be honest. People are weird. It's okay. It seems one of the more harmless idiosyncrasies that we could go through, all things considered. But I think the potential for those AIs, especially the large language models, to find themselves in strange parts of their latent space, so to go off in weird angles, similar to the YouTube algorithm, that if you keep clicking on it, eventually you end up in some pretty weird videos, right? This is perhaps the problem, that if you talk to it long enough, it actually becomes a very strange thing to talk to. And this is because most people don't talk to it that long. So the weird people that I just labeled as weird, they're actually outliers statistically, and they're experiencing a piece of the domain that hasn't really been reinforced and tested by the training algorithm. And that will lead to bad consequences, surely, as we saw with the YouTube algorithm, for example.
I would like to thank our panel.
That was a really depressing note to end on.
And we're going to be taking a 10-minute break here.